For decades, Pontiac stood as one of America's most recognizable car brands. It gave the world some of the most memorable muscle machines of all time, yet ended in a quiet downfall that left car lovers across the globe stunned. How did a company that once symbolized raw horsepower, rebellious spirit, and carefree cruising wind up vanishing into the automotive graveyard? Some point to a shocking series of managerial missteps, while others claim it was doomed by forces way beyond its control. In this video, we're going to uncover the truth behind Pontiac's fate and explore the brand's meteoric rise, its stumble into infamy, and the final chapter that still sparks debate among enthusiasts today. You'll hear about the behind-the-scenes deals and breathtaking gambles that shaped Pontiac's history, from secret performance projects that rattled General Motors' boardroom to radical design flops that the public simply couldn't stand. By the end, you might wonder if Pontiac really deserved the axe, or if it could have been saved by just a few better decisions. Buckle up and get ready for a ride through muscle car legends, pop culture fame, and the slow-motion train wreck that led to this iconic brand's untimely demise. Pontiac's story begins in 1926, when General Motors introduced it as a bridge between the economical Chevrolet and GM's more luxurious models like Oldsmobile or Cadillac. The original game plan was to offer a solid, trustworthy automobile for buyers looking to move beyond the bare-bones basics of Chevy but still keep costs in check. At first, this approach made a lot of sense. It gave GM a broader arsenal of brands, each targeting a specific slice of the market. But despite this promising start, Pontiac began to suffer a slow decline in the 1940s and 50s. Many of its models were perceived as dull, conservative, and frankly, a little too focused on older drivers. The marketing leaned heavily on reliability and tradition, which might sound great on paper, but younger post-war buyers, hungry for speed and excitement, found it all a little underwhelming. Even the brand's styling was considered tame compared to the flashy fins and chrome-laden silhouettes offered by competing automakers. As the years wore on, auto enthusiasts started associating Pontiac with old-fashioned sensibilities. Some even joked that Pontiac stood for perfectly ordinary, never thrilling in any capacity, mocking the brand's unremarkable performance. These negative sentiments formed a stubborn reputation that the automaker would struggle against for decades. By the end of the 1950s, many people believed Pontiac was destined to remain the car for your kindly grandma, reliable, maybe comfortable, but far from exhilarating. Internally though, certain individuals at Pontiac believed the brand was capable of so much more. Their restlessness coincided with a growing appetite for performance and style in the American market. While top GM executives stood firm on their cautious approach, a small group of engineers in Pontiac's ranks started plotting a bold move. If standard models were dismissed as boring grandma cars, maybe a rebellious, youth-oriented machine could awaken Pontiac from its long slumber. They were right, but to succeed, they'd have to bend a few rules, ruffle plenty of feathers, and face potential backlash from the conservative higher-ups. It would be risky, but as you'll soon see, risk-taking quickly became a Pontiac trademark. By the early 1960s, Pontiac's corporate guardians at GM had imposed strict limitations on factory-backed performance, racing programs, and high-horsepower engines. Racing, they reasoned, was expensive and potentially dangerous to the company's family-friendly image. However, John DeLorean, yes, the same creative mind who would later bring the famous DeLorean sports car to life, teamed up with Bill Collins and Russ G to hatch a plan. They envisioned a high-performance package stuffed into a mid-size Pontiac, aimed squarely at younger car fanatics who craved power and style. This hush-hush project culminated in the now legendary Pontiac GTO, first offered in 1964 as a performance option on the Tempest. Slipping under GM's strict guidelines, they found a loophole by classifying the GTO as just an option package. But under the hood was a 389 cubic inch V8 complete with a 4-barrel carburetor, flanked by stiffer suspension, sporty wheels, and a throaty exhaust note that dripped with attitude. The car's name, GTO, was borrowed from Ferrari's 250 GTO, a fact that still ruffles some Italian feathers to this day. GM's top brass expected the GTO would sell in modest numbers, perhaps around 5,000 units in its first year. Instead, it blew past that figure, reaching more than 6 times the company's cautious forecast. This runaway success not only revolutionized Pontiac's image overnight, but also played a huge role in kicking off the American muscle car era. Suddenly, Pontiac was exciting, rebellious, and cool. The GTO was an instant icon, sporting the tagline, "The Great One," a bit of braggadocio that it had certainly earned. Critics and enthusiasts marveled at how this youthful upstart overshadowed even the brand's own tradition-bound identity. People who had once ridiculed Pontiac's grandmotherly reputation now scrambled to get behind the wheel of the new hot rod in town. If the dull public perception of Pontiac had been a lingering headache, the GTO was the jolt of adrenaline that swept everything else off the table. Behind the scenes, DeLorean and his team faced tense moments. Had the GTO bombed, they might have been fired for stepping out of line, but success speaks louder than corporate policies. Emboldened by that success, Pontiac roared ahead, setting the pace for other GM divisions, and even outside rivals that now wanted in on the muscle car mania. The seed of Pontiac's newfound swagger was planted, but its real golden moment in popular culture lay just around the corner. Riding the wave of excitement spurred by the GTO, Pontiac prepared to unveil another masterpiece. This time, the brand wanted to capture the booming pony car market, dominated by Ford's Mustang and Chevy's Camaro. Enter the Pontiac Firebird, introduced in 1967. From the start, it shared many similarities with the Camaro, but the Firebird offered a subtly more upscale feel and distinct styling cues that set it apart, particularly as the line evolved into the Trans Am performance model. Throughout the early 1970s, the Firebird and its higher performance Trans Am variant developed a loyal following, but the real cultural explosion happened in 1977 thanks to a little film called Smokey and the Bandit, starring Burt Reynolds. His black and gold Trans Am effectively hijacked the public imagination. Young viewers and aspiring rebels everywhere wanted to be just like the Bandit, peeling out in a screeching muscle car, outrunning the law, and flashing a sly grin at every turn. The Trans Am's screaming chicken hood decal turned from an odd design quirk into a badge of honor. Sales nearly doubled, and dealer lots across America couldn't keep up with demand. This Hollywood-fueled moment catapulted Pontiac to the forefront of American pop culture. Far from the brand's staid earlier decades, Pontiac was now the official automotive sponsor of youthful exuberance. Yet, this newfound fame also brought challenges. While the Trans Am soared in popularity, emission regulations and fuel economy concerns were robbing muscle cars of their once feared horsepower. Pontiac tried to save face with turbocharged versions in the late 1970s and early 80s, but these attempts largely fell flat, leaving many fans disappointed. Still, the damage to Pontiac's credibility was minimal at this stage because the Trans Am's star power was just that strong. The brand had GTOs anchoring its muscle car legacy and the Firebird Trans Am flexing its pop culture might. Pontiacs were the rebellious cousin of GM's more respectable lines, and consumers loved it. It seemed like the brand could do no wrong. But, as you'll see next, the price of that success was a sense of overconfidence. Pontiac would soon make a daring leap into new territory, one that ignited as much controversy as the engine fires that followed. Buoyed by the momentum of the GTO and Firebird, Pontiac decided to push the envelope even further in the 1980s with a small mid-engine sports car known as the Fiero. On paper, it looked like a Triumph. Sleek proportions, plastic body panels resistant to rust, and a mid-engine layout typically reserved for high-end European exotics. More importantly, the Fiero promised exceptional fuel efficiency at a time when gas prices loomed large in the American psyche. This was also when Japanese car makers were rapidly gaining ground by offering practicality and affordability. Pontiac wanted to fight back, yet the reality proved far messier. Development was rushed. Reports say it went from a clean sheet design to a running prototype in just 6 months. With a shoestring budget of around $400 million, Pontiac found itself forced to cut corners. Instead of a refined, sporty engine, the early Fieros received the notoriously heavy and underpowered Iron Duke 4-cylinder, which made a meager 90-something horsepower. Worse still, the engine had a nagging tendency to fail catastrophically. Connecting rods sometimes decided they'd had enough, blasting holes in the block and spewing oil onto scorching hot engine components. The result was, quite literally, a car that caught fire. This fiasco not only tarnished the Fiero's reputation, but stained Pontiac's growing image as a performance innovator. Rather than the nimble sports car that could go toe-to-toe with foreign rivals, it became a cautionary tale in how not to accelerate a development timeline. Sales lagged badly, and GM's higher management essentially lost faith in the Fiero's ability to redeem itself, despite some noteworthy improvements in its final year. By 1988, the Fiero was discontinued, leaving behind a legacy of unrealized potential and smoky disappointment. For Pontiac, the Fiero debacle took the wind out of its sails at a critical moment. Still, the brand managed to keep forging ahead, thanks to loyal enthusiasts who continued to snap up Firebirds and Transams. But the seeds of trouble had been sown. Overconfidence had led to another rushed project, and in a few short years, Pontiac would attempt an even more audacious leap of faith that many consider the ultimate illustration of the brand's flawed decision-making process. By the late 1990s, American roads were starting to fill with compact SUVs and crossovers from Japan. Models like Toyota's RAV4 and Honda's CR-V were popular for their blend of utility and efficiency. General Motors, feeling a step behind, needed a fresh alternative to lure trendy Gen X buyers looking for something edgy. Pontiac eagerly volunteered, hoping to capitalize on its rebellious reputation to outdo the competition. The result was the Aztek, launched in 2000 with a massive $110 million marketing campaign. But the trouble started long before the first Aztek rolled off the assembly line. Far too many committees and executives had their say on the final design, warping the concept into a strange mishmash of awkward angles, clashing body cladding, and bizarre proportions. Although it boasted some unique ideas, like a removable cooler and an optional camping tent attachment, those novelties weren't enough to overshadow a shape many found, frankly, hideous. Critics labeled it one of the ugliest cars in history, and sales numbers were abysmal. In another timeline, the Aztek might have quietly disappeared, leaving only a minor footnote in automotive trivia. But fate had different plans. Years after its failure, the car found an unlikely resurgence in the hit TV series Breaking Bad, in which Walter White drove a faded Aztek, a subtle metaphor for the drab life he yearned to escape. Ironically, this pop culture cameo kept the Aztek in public consciousness longer than GM probably wanted. Overall, though, the Aztek's flop inflicted a huge blow to Pontiac's brand image. This was a company once revered for muscle cars and rebellious flair. Now, it had become a punchline for misguided design. The debacle underscored a deeper dysfunction within GM. Committees hamstrung creativity, budgets shrank, and market decisions became reactive rather than visionary. Despite the disappointment, Pontiac tried one more bold pivot. Yet again, the brand would look overseas for inspiration, hoping to recapture the magic of its earlier performance hits. With the Aztek fiasco behind them, Pontiac needed a morale boost, and fast. Interestingly, the solution was waiting on another continent. General Motors owned Holden, an Australian manufacturer renowned for building powerful rear-wheel drive sedans and coupes. Pontiac decided to repurpose two Holden models for the American market. The first one was the 5th generation GTO, launched in 2004. Borrowing heavily from the Holden Monaro, this new GTO carried impressive hardware under the hood. A Corvette-sourced LS1 engine with 350 horsepower initially, upgraded to an LS2 with 400 horsepower in later versions. On paper, this revived GTO was a beast capable of embarrassing many modern cars at the drag strip, but from a design standpoint, it fell short of fan expectations. Critics complained it looked too understated, lacking the menacing flair of the classic GTO. Younger buyers simply didn't connect with its mild styling, and older enthusiasts missed the raw flamboyance of the 60s muscle era. Sales targets were never met, and by 2006, Pontiac pulled the plug. Then came the G8 in 2008, also sourced from Holden, this time from the Commodore sedan platform. Enthusiasts quickly hailed the G8 as a genuine sports sedan, offering up to 415 horsepower in the top-tier GXP trim. Car reviewers gushed about its performance, balanced handling, and well-tuned suspension. It seemed like a car that could finally spark a Pontiac Renaissance, yet the timing couldn't have been worse. As America entered a severe economic downturn, General Motors found itself on the brink of financial ruin. G8 production figures never had a chance to soar, and when the dust settled, so did Pontiac's final hopes for redemption. Although the G8 had all the traits enthusiasts wanted, power, agility, and a certain sleeper allure, it arrived in showrooms just in time to witness the biggest automotive industry shake-up in decades. In many ways, the G8 stands as Pontiac's glorious final stand, a testament to what the brand could achieve if given proper resources and freedom. But even the mightiest car can't outrun a corporate meltdown. By 2009, the global financial crisis had forced America's auto giants into survival mode. While Ford managed to scrape by without direct government assistance, General Motors was in dire need of a bailout. Negotiations with the US government led to a fateful arrangement. In exchange for billions of dollars in aid, GM offered to shutter several underperforming brands. Pontiac, which had been in GM's stable for over 80 years, found itself on the chopping block alongside Hummer. In retrospect, many industry analysts argue that Pontiac's discontinuation was predictable. The brand's management had been inconsistent for decades, oscillating between thrilling muscle cars and disappointing misfires like the Aztek. GM's leadership rarely gave Pontiac consistent direction or resources to build a cohesive identity. Though the brand experienced flashes of greatness, especially in the 1960s and 70s, it was also saddled with badge-engineered mediocrity, like the G6, which never managed to capture the public's imagination. When the final Pontiac G6 rolled off the assembly line in early 2010, a chapter of American automotive history closed forever. It was a somber moment for fans who'd grown up idolizing the Firebird Trans Am or longing for GTO glory. In an era of tightening budgets, changing consumer tastes, and stiff foreign competition, Pontiac's demise was almost a symbolic casualty of old-school American car culture. GM, reeling from financial crisis, had little appetite for continuing to gamble on a brand that had lost its way and was no longer a sure bet to generate profits. Yet the question remains, did Pontiac truly deserve this fate? Some blame GM for mishandling what could have been a thriving performance marquee. Others argue that consumer preferences had evolved well beyond flashy muscle cars and that the brand simply failed to adapt. Either way, the final curtain had come down, leaving an enduring question about what might have happened if Pontiac's rebellious spirit had been nurtured more wisely. Pontiac's arc is among the most dramatic in automotive history. It began as a practical, mid-priced offering, soared to new heights with the GTO and Firebird, and later stumbled with rushed experiments and flawed designs. Out of that roller coaster emerged legendary icons loved by generations, along with painful cautionary tales that remain etched in memory. Even in its last breaths, Pontiac tried to recapture its soul through imported performance sedans, which only proved how much potential the brand still had, if only circumstances had been different. Could Pontiac have been saved with better timing or a more consistent strategy? Perhaps. If GM's leadership had channeled the brand's rebellious streak into a cohesive performance-oriented lineup, avoiding half-baked ideas and overreach, we might still be seeing modern-day Trans Ams and GTOs on the streets. Instead, Pontiac stands as a reminder of how swiftly fortunes can change in the auto industry. It's also a testament to the power of well-executed risk, as seen in the GTO's game-changing debut and the Firebird's cinematic triumph. For enthusiasts and casual fans alike, the Pontiac name still evokes images of open highways, roaring V8s, and a sense of freedom unique to the American car culture of the 20th century. Whether you believe Pontiac got what it deserved or feel it was an unjust loss, there's no denying the brand left an indelible mark. it remains a fascinating saga of triumphs and mishaps, proof that sometimes the line between success and failure is much thinner than we'd like to admit. So, what do you think? Should Pontiac have fought its way back from the brink, or was the brand's time truly up? Let us know your take on whether Pontiac's legendary heritage should have led to a second chance. Regardless of where you stand, one thing is certain: the stories behind Pontiac's most memorable cars will forever be part of America's automotive DNA.